Hello and welcome to Chapter 5 of The Hobbit, Riddles in the Dark. I'm excited about this chapter because we're in a really tense spot here. Bilbo, knocked out cold, don't know where he is. Everybody's running for their lives, don't know what's going on. We got riddles in the dark. That doesn't help us know what's going to happen, but take your best guesses as to what might happen. And see if you have any questions, if you have any answers, all that type of stuff. Do our first pre-reading questions. And we are going to get started. Chapter 5. Oh, before we start, there is a character coming up that you might recognize because his voice is very famous in all of these Lord of the Rings and Hobbit movies. I'm going to do my best to try it out, but please read these parts on your own and try to do the voice on your own because it's really fun to do. I'm going to have fun with it. I hope you do too. All right, so here we go. Chapter 5, Riddles in the Dark. Our trusty little reading thing here. Notepad. When Bilbo opened his eyes, he wondered if he had, for it was just as dark as with them shut. No one was anywhere near him. Just imagine his fright. He could hear nothing, see nothing, and he could feel nothing except the stone of the floor. Very slowly he got up and groped about on all fours, till he touched the wall of the tunnel. But neither up nor down could he find anything. Nothing at all. No sign of goblins, no sign of dwarves. His head was swimming, and he was far from certain even of the direction they had been going when he had his fall. He guessed as well as he could, and crawled along for a good way, till suddenly his hand met what felt like a tiny ring of cold metal. That's important. Lying on the floor of the tunnel. It was a turning point in his career, but he did not know it. He put the ring in his pocket almost without thinking. Certainly it did not seem of any particular use at the moment. He did not go much further, but sat down on the cold floor and gave himself up to complete miserableness for a long while. He thought of himself frying bacon and eggs in his own kitchen at home, for he could feel inside that it was high time for some meal or other, but that only made him miserabler. He could not think what to do, nor could he think what had happened, or why he had been left behind, or why, if he had been left behind, the goblins had not caught him, or even why his head was so sore. The truth was he had been lying quiet, out of sight and out of mind, in a very dark corner for a long while. After some time he felt for his pipe. It was not broken, and that was something. Then he felt for his pouch, and there was some tobacco in it, and that was something more. Then he felt for matches, and he could not find any at all, and that shattered his hopes completely. Just as well for him, as he agreed when he came to his senses. Goodness knows what the striking of matches and the smell of tobacco would have brought on him out of dark holes in that horrible place. Still, at the moment he felt very crushed, but in slapping all his pockets and feeling all around himself for matches, his hand came on the hilt of his little sword, the little dagger that he got from the trolls, and that he had quite forgotten, nor do the goblins seem to have noticed it, as he wore it inside his breeches. Now he drew it out. It shone pale and dim before his eyes. So it is an elvish blade, too, he thought, and goblins are not very near, and yet not far enough. But somehow he was comforted. It was rather splendid to be wearing a blade made in Gondolin for the Goblin Wars, of which so many songs had sung, and also he had noticed that such weapons made a great impression on goblins that came upon them suddenly. Go back? He thought. No good at all. Go sideways? Impossible. Go forward. Only thing to do. On we go. So up he got and trotted along with his little sword held in front of him, at one hand feeling the wall, and his heart all of a pitter-patter. Now certainly, Bilbo was in what is called a tight place. But you must remember it was not quite so tight for him as it would have been for you and me. Hobbits are not quite like ordinary people, and after all, if their holes are nice cheery places and properly aired, quite different from the tunnels of the goblins, still, they are more used to tunneling than we are, and they do not easily lose their sense of direction underground, not when their heads have recovered from being bumped. Also, they can move very quietly and hide easily and recover wonderfully from falls and bruises, and they have a fund of wisdom and wise sayings that most men have mostly never heard or have forgotten long ago. I should not have liked to have been in Mr. Baggins' place, all the same. The tunnel seemed to have no end. All he knew that it was still going down pretty steadily and keeping in the same direction in spite of a twist and a turn or two. There were passages leading off to the side every now and then, as he knew by the glimmer of his sword, or could feel with his hand on the wall. Of these he took no notice, except to hurry past for fear of goblins or half-imagined dark things coming out of them. On and on he went, down and down, and still he heard no sound of anything except the occasional whir of a bat by his ears, which startled him at first, till it became too frequent to bother about. I do not know how long he kept on like this, hating to go on, not daring to stop, on, until he was tireder than tired. It seemed like all the way tomorrow and over it to the days beyond. Suddenly, without any warning, he trotted splash into water. Oh! It was icy cold. That pulled him up sharp and short. He did not know whether it was just a pool in the path or the edge of an underground stream that crossed the passage or the brink of a deep, dark subterranean lake. The sword was hardly shining at all. He stopped, and he could hear when he listened hard, drops dripping from an unseen roof into the water below. But there seemed no other sort of sound. So it is a pool or a lake, and not an underground river, he thought. Still, he did not dare to wade out into the darkness. He could not swim. And he thought, too, of nasty, slimy things with big, bulging, blind eyes, wriggling in the water. There are strange things living in the pools and lakes in the heart of the mountain. Fish whose fathers swam in, goodness only knows how many years ago, and never swam out again, while their eyes grew bigger and bigger and bigger from trying to see the blackness. Also, there are other things more slimy than fish. Even in the tunnels and caves of the goblins have made for themselves, there are other things living unbeknown to them that have sneaked in from the outside to lie up in the dark. Some of these caves, too, go back in their beginnings to ages before the goblins, who only widened them and joined them up with passages. And the original owners are still there in odd corners, slinking and nosing about. Deep down here by the water lived old Gollum, a small, slimy creature. I don't know where he came from, nor who or what he was. He was Gollum, as dark as darkness, except for two big, round, pale eyes in his thin face. He had a little boat, and he rowed about quite quietly on the lake, for a lake it was, wide and deep and deadly cold. He paddled it with large feet dangling over the side, but never a ripple did he make, not he. He was looking out of his pale, lamp-like eyes for blind fish, which he grabbed with his long fingers as quick as thinking. He liked meat, too. Goblin he thought good when he could get it, but he took care they never found him out. He just throttled them from behind if they ever came down alone anywhere near the edge of the water while he was prowling about. They very seldom did, for they had a feeling that something unpleasant was lurking down there, down at the very roots of the mountain. They had come on the lake when they were tunneling down long ago, and they had found they could go no further, so there their road ended in that direction, and there was no reason to go that way unless the great goblin sent them. Sometimes he took a fancy for fish from the lake, and sometimes neither goblin or fish came back. Actually, Gollum lived on a slimy island of rock in the middle of the lake. He was watching Bilbo now from a distance with pale eyes, like telescopes. Bilbo could not see him, but he was wondering a lot about Bilbo, for he could see that he was no goblin at all. Gollum got into his boat and shot off from the island, while Bilbo was sitting on the brink altogether flummoxed, and at the end of his way and his wits. Suddenly he came up Gollum and whispered and hissed, "Bless us and splash us, my precious. I guess it's a choice feast. At least a tasty morsel it'd make us Gollum." And when he said Gollum, he made a horrible swallowing noise in his throat. That is how he got his name, though he always called himself my precious. The Hobbit jumped nearly out of his skin when the hiss came in his ears, and he suddenly saw the pale eyes sticking out at him. "Who are you?" he said, thrusting his dagger in front of him. "What is he, my
my precious,"
whispered Gollum, who always spoke to himself, though never having anyone else to speak through. This is what he had come to find out, for he was not really hungry at the moment, only curious. Otherwise, he would have grabbed first and whispered afterwards. I am Mr. Bilbo Baggins. I have lost the dwarves, and I have lost the wizard, and I don't know where I am, and I don't want to know if I can only get away."
"What's he got in his hands?"
said Gollum, looking at a sword which he did not quite like. A sword, a blade which came out of Gondolin, said Gollum, and became quite polite.
"Perhaps she sits here and chats with it a bitsy, my precious. It likes riddles, perhaps it does it?"
He was anxious to appear friendly, at any rate for the moment, and until he found out more about the sword and the Hobbit, whether he was quite alone really, whether he was good to eat, and whether Gollum was really hungry. Riddles were all he could think of. Asking him and sometimes guessing them had been the only game he had ever played with other funny creatures sitting in their holes long, long ago. Before he lost all his friends and was driven away, alone, and crept down, 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 into the dark under the mountains. "Very well," said Bilbo, who was anxious to agree, until he found out more about the creature, whether he was quite alone, whether he was fierce or hungry, and whether he was a friend of the goblins. "You ask first," he said, because he had not had time to think of a riddle, so Gollum hissed.
"What has roots that nobody sees, is taller than trees, up it goes, and yet never grows?"
"Easy," said Bilbo. "Mountain, I suppose."
"Does it get easy? It must have a competition with us, my precious. Yes, if precious asks and it doesn't answer, we eat it, my precious. If it asks us and we doesn't answer, then we does what it wants, eh? We shows it the way out, yes."
"All right," said Bilbo, not daring to disagree, and nearly bursting his brain to think of riddles that could save him from being eaten. 30 white horses on a red hill. First they champ, then they stamp, then they stand still. That was all he could think of to ask. The idea of eating was rather on his mind. It was rather an old one, too, and Gollum knew the answer as well as you do. When I first read this, I had no idea what the answer was. So if you don't know what the answer was, that's okay. You should try to guess it. 30 white horses on a red hill. First they champ, then they stamp, then they stand still. Take a guess before we actually get to it. Here we go.
"Chestnuts, chestnuts," he hissed. "Teeth, teeth, my precious. Then we only had 6.
Then he asked his second.
"Voiceless it cries, wingless flutters, toothless bites, mouthless mutters."
"Half a moment," cried Bilbo, who was still thinking uncomfortably about eating. Fortunately, he had once heard something rather like this before, and getting his wits back, he thought of the answer. "Wind, wind, of course," he said, and he was so pleased that he made up one on the spot. "This'll puzzle the nasty little underground creature," he thought. "An eye in the blue face saw an eye in the green face. That eye is like to this eye," said the first eye, "but in low place, not in high place." said Gollum. He had been underground a long, long time, and was forgetting this sort of thing. But just as Bilbo was beginning to hope that the wretch would not be able to answer, Gollum brought up memories of ages and ages and ages before, when he lived with his grandmother in a hole in a bank by the river.
"My precious," he said. "Sun on the daisies, it means, it does."
But these ordinary, above-ground, everyday sort of riddles were tiring for him. Also, they reminded him of days when he had been less lonely and sneaky and nasty, and that put him out of temper. What is more, they made him hungry, so this time he tried something a little bit more difficult and more unpleasant.
"It cannot be seen, it cannot be felt, it cannot be heard, cannot be smelt. It lies behind stars and under hills, and empty halls it fills. It comes first and follows after, and life. kills laughter.
Unfortunately for Gollum, Bilbo had heard that sort of thing before, and the answer was all round him anyway. Dark, he said, without even scratching his head or putting on his thinking cap. A box without hinges, key or lid, yet golden treasure inside is hid. He asked to gain time, until he could think of a really hard one. This, he thought, a dreadfully easy chestnut, though he had not asked it in the usual words. But it proved a nasty poser for Gollum. He hissed to himself, and while he did not answer, he whispered and spluttered. After some time, while Bilbo became impatient, "Well, what is it?" he said. "The answer is not a kettle boiling over, as you seem to think from the noises you are making."
"Give us a chance! Let it give us a chance, my precious."
"Well," said Bilbo, after giving him a long chance, "what about your guess?" But suddenly Gollum remembered thieving from nests long ago and sitting under the river bank teaching his grandmother to suck.
"Eggs, he hissed. Eggs it is."
Then he asked,
"Lie without breath, as cold as death, never thirsty, ever drinking, all in mail, never clinking."
He also, in his turn, thought this was a dreadfully easy one, because he was always thinking of the answer. But he could not remember any better at the moment. He was so flustered by the egg question. All the same, it was a poser for poor Bilbo, who never had anything to do with water if he could help it. "I imagine you know the answer, of course." Again, I had no idea, or could guess it as easy as winking, since you are sitting comfortably at home and have not the danger of being eaten to disturb your thinking. Bilbo sat and cleared his throat once or twice, but no answer came. After a while, Gollum began to hiss with pleasure to himself.
"Is it nice, precious? Is it juicy? Is it scrumptious? Crunchable?"
He began to peer at Bilbo out of the darkness. "Half a moment," said the Hobbit, shivering. "I gave you a good long chance just now."
"It must make haste, haste,"
said Gollum, beginning to climb out of his boat onto the shore to get at Bilbo. But when he put his long, webby foot in the water, a fish jumped out in fright and fell on Bilbo's toes. "Ugh!" he said. "It's cold and clammy." And so he guessed. "Fish! Fish!" he cried. "It is fish!" Gollum was dreadfully disappointed, but Bilbo asked another riddle as quick as he ever could, so that Gollum had to get back into his boat and think. No legs lay on one leg. 2 legs sat near on 3 legs. 4 legs got some.